Hello and welcome to week seven's topic. The lecture this week is entitled Total Quality Management. You may say, well, surely the whole program is about the holistic total approach to quality management. Well, yes, it is. But what I want to do is to build on last week's work where we looked at traditional quality control, quality and process control systems, and move it on this week to think not about quality by conformance, but to think about quality by design and total quality management. What we're going to be doing is studying, in fact, in some cases, revising our knowledge of the origins of TQM. We're then going to consider how we might want to implement quality and a holistic total approach to quality. I'm then going to take you a walk through some of the improvement programs, almost a chronological walkthrough of some of the most important programs for quality management under the banner of TQM. And it's only then, I think, that we can start looking at trying to define what TQM is and also this philosophy of Kaizen. And then finally, we'll put our critical lenses on and think about where some of the criticisms have occurred of the TQM approach. The origins of TQM really emerged through the development of Japan and the reconstruction of the Japanese economy after the Second World War in the 1950s and then through into the 1960s. And what writers and philosophers such as Deming and Duran did is that they were involved in sending them their message from the USA into Japan. We looked at this in the week on the gurus of quality, but what the notion was that it was a molding of ideas on quality into a coherent operating philosophy. In other words, in Japan, they managed to operationalize and put into practice some of the learning and some of the lessons that Deming and Duran had. So two of the things that are most important there are that quality shouldn't just be nice to have, an additional item, but it should be an integral part of any management control system. And then secondly, it shouldn't just be about detection and managing processes, trying to identify when things go wrong, but in fact a prevention approach, or if you like, getting quality right at the start, at the design stage, was the key to success. Clearly, if fewer faults were found and fewer things went wrong in the process, then the quality would be expected to increase and it would cost us less in terms of money. Now, this was really heralded as a big breakthrough in management circles. So this work in the 50s and 60s is really important. When we looked at the gurus, we also looked at Feigenbaum's work, Armand Feigenbaum, and he broadened this concept of quality control, and he was the first person to use the term total quality control. Later, of course, we tended to think, well, it's not just about control, it's also about planning, the design. I mean, the work of Duran told us that quality was more than just the control process. So TQC morphed in the 1980s into what we now know as the term or the acronym TQM, Total Quality Management. Now, there is a danger when we start looking at TQM that people just think of it as being a nice, cuddly, culturally based approach involving participation, involvement of the employees and so on. But in fact, as Mihaela Kellerman in her book argued, the reality is it was a combination of two elements, what we might call the hard approach, using statistics, quantification, and in fact, the early gurus' work, particularly people like Deming and Duran, really emphasized these elements. But it was this forging together with a softer approach as well, that it isn't just about quantification, that there are some intangible elements, and that really we should combine the quality and process control approach with a managerial approach and a management style that focused on leadership, employee involvement, and cultural change. So this is where we start thinking about some of the later wave of American gurus. We talked about Tom Peters, Philip Crosby, for example, when we looked at writers on quality management earlier. So it's this combination, this intention to create a strong organization culture where people are committed to quality and customer satisfaction, together with the statistical approach, the collation of data, and being able to properly analyze data and information on quality that we collect during the process. Now, before we start thinking about how to get to TQM, there is a danger that people can sometimes say, yes, we adopted TQM in our organization, but it didn't work, or it did work. And the danger is there that they haven't really clarified exactly what they mean by the term TQM. It really is an umbrella term. It can be tackled in a number of different ways. So yes, we can talk about the needs to implement quality management and to move to a more total, holistic approach to quality management, incorporating people, engaging people, participation, the qualitative as well as the quantitative elements. But the question is, how do we actually get there? So the first question I would raise in terms of implementing quality management is any organization has to think about how they're going to implement it. What exactly are they going to be implementing on their approach and trying to develop and improve quality management and the culture within their organization. The other factor that I think is really important in total quality is that for it to be a truly holistic approach to quality, it must have shared ownership. It mustn't just be a top-down management thing, imposing it on employees, but it should be welling up from the groundswell as well, from the shop floor upwards, if you like. And so this question of ownership, that people actually believe it and take ownership of the process. It's only through participation, involvement, and ownership that an organization can truly move towards a total approach, or can claim to have a total approach to quality management in their organization. So what we're then going to do is to think about the ways in which organizations have tried to implement and ensure ownership of quality management programs in their organization. So we're going to have a look through the range of quality programs, as I've said before, in pretty much a chronological order as to how these have developed. The programs we're going to look at are listed on this slide: Zero Defects, Quality Circles, Kaizen, and then Business Excellence. So let's have a look, an introduction to each of these before studying each in more detail. Zero Defects was really introduced in the 1960s, and it was this recognition and this manifest statement by an organization that their true goal was to have nothing go wrong in the process and to ensure high quality at all times. Of course, the idea behind zero defects is that if you can avoid problems at the start and therefore prevent quality problems later on, try and prevent things from going wrong in your process, in your product, in your customer service, and so on, then this is the best way to quality, because there's not even the need to be doing so much quality control. If you have confidence that your system is designed for prevention, then you have confidence in the product or the service that you're providing to the customer. Quality circles evolved later. Really, zero defects sent out the message, but quality circles involved really the start of participation and employee involvement. We'll be looking at that in some detail. It's got the date there, the 1980s. Really, this was commenced in the 1960s into the 70s in Japan, but came to wider worldwide recognition in the 1980s. So that's why that date of 1980s is there, because it started to be adopted and put in place by organisations worldwide from the 1980s onward. Quality circles tends to be more of a participative approach, but when we move into the 1990s, the term Kaizen came into prominence. Kaizen actually simply means, in Japanese, the word Kai means change, and Zen means good, something that's good or pleasurable. You've all heard of, the need for Zen in wellness programs and so on. Well, it's the same term. So it means change for the better, or if you like, continuous improvement. Now, it's interesting because programs weren't really labeled Kaizen in Japan, but a book was written in 1986 by Masaki Imao. I think we talked about him before briefly. And Masaki Imao tried to identify 16 lessons of Japanese quality programs and the secret behind some of the big improvement programs within Japanese industry. And so he actually coined this term Kaizen to summarize the approach taken by Toyota, taken by Honda, to things like just-in-time management, TQM, and so on. And in fact, it caught on, so that Western companies started using the term Kaizen more readily. And then finally, when we move into the 2000s, there's this real notion about business excellence. It built upon the works of Tom Peters and others, who really said, well, we need to not just look at it at the operational level, not just look at quality and improvement at the operational level, but really it's the core of business excellence. You might remember the Sancombe model from earlier on, and this puts quality at the heart of the whole business. If you get the quality right and you get quality assured, then it should lead you to excellence throughout your whole business operation. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. Clearly, once you've done your analysis and you've effectively developed the fishbone diagram, which gives you a map of the whole problem, because the reason why you've done that is that it actually puts down on paper or on the screen, however you want to think about it, it puts down a map of the whole picture. That's where you start identifying where the problems are, and you go out and you start collecting information, data and information that's useful. It might be process data, might be customer data, might be information on the procedures or the technology that's used, or information from managers or from salespeople, whatever you want to be looking at. You collate all of that and you do some form of analysis. Now, clearly, there are a whole set of different ways in which you can do that, because it depends on what sort of data you need, where the source of the problem is, and so on. And in quality circles, the facilitator would work with the quality circle, particularly in the early days, to identify suitable analytical tools and techniques, and, if you like, walk them through the whole process of trying to put together a good analysis. You see, the problem is a lot of people jump to the solution before they've actually analysed the problem, collected data, and analysed that data. You then work to develop the solution to the problem. And a very key point as well in quality circles is the final stage of recommendation. Yes, produce the recommendations, but in most organisations this involved people in the quality circle presenting their ideas to decision makers, the senior managers, to directors, and so on. And this again developed the individuals. It meant that rather than just moaning that there was a problem and coming up with ideas as to how it could be improved without any real analysis, they were trained in the art of actually putting together their ideas, producing a report and presenting the business case for any changes that they wanted to make. And certainly this is a really important part of the whole process. So you can see that by going through that process, this engendered engagement, participation from the employees, but also involved them putting together robust, well analysed, well thought through suggestions for improvement. Okay, so the quality circle is actually really important in the evolution of total quality management, because it gave an intro for people throughout the organisation to engage and participate in quality matters. Now, some people have been very critical of this approach. Quality circles as a term has got a bad name in many instances. It needs a very compliant workforce in some ways, or at least one where the individuals are highly committed to quality improvement and so on. If it's introduced into an environment where there isn't that commitment, and where there's poor industrial relations and a lack of trust between managers and other employees, then this can result in problems. Of course, you've got to realise that in post-war Japan, actually the culture in Japan was this idea of everyone working together and prioritising the company ahead of themselves in terms of where their attention should be put. So you have to be careful about what setting you're introducing these into. On that theme that I've just talked about, the benefits of quality circles that people put forward is to say can improve employee relations, improve quality, of course, that's the sort of reason why you started this in the first place, increases the motivation and responsibility for quality amongst employees, and also that these employees become more receptive to new methods and ideas because they've gone through and tried to argue for changes in methods and new ideas and implementation of new ways of doing things, that actually if a business case is put to them for change, they can become more change orientated, and also provided a forum for discussion and communication that actually for many quality circle people involved in the quality circle, the participants, it was often the first time they'd actually talked face to face meaningfully with senior decision makers in the organisation. But as I said, there are some problems. Caveats is a very good word, isn't it? It's potential issues, potential problems, things to look out for. And as I've just said, there must be that senior management commitment. It's critical to success. It's no good managers just thinking they can window dress by introducing this. It has to be something that's important to the employees, and that senior management are committed to it. It's no good firing off all these quality circles in all directions, only then to ignore the recommendations that are coming through. There are also problems in the organisations. There's often resentment from some of the employees. Why should we do this? This is the management's job. You know, it's surely not our job to be doing all this sort of work. And certainly a lot of people chose not to involve themselves in quality circles. It was voluntary, and in most organisations actually the number of people not participating tends to be higher than those who did participate. There's also frequently resentment from managers, particularly middle managers, because they get concerned that, wait a minute, all these quality circles are questioning what I'm doing and then almost bypassing me and reporting to senior managers. This nice term, eroding their prerogatives, comes into play. It's sort of eroding their power and their sort of rights as a manager. And I know that you have to be very careful to make sure, and also senior decision makers have to be well briefed, that they have to sort of demonstrate to middle managers in particular that they're not bypassing them, they're not blaming them, but actually they can be working together. And then the final one is this danger of the secret society factor, that these quality circles can become very insular if you're not careful. It's often known as the halo effect, that a small number of workers are favoured, see themselves as superior to the others, and become quite exclusive. And sometimes when it's suggested maybe you ought to circulate the membership around a bit, some members ought to drop out, others ought to join, they can be resistant to that. So if you're implementing these sort of programs, you have to be careful to make sure that halo effect doesn't occur, that the quality circle participants aren't resented by other people in the organization. Okay, so we move towards Kaizen improvement. And as I've said, Kaizen means change, Kai, Zen for the better. But essentially, if you wanted a literal translation, it's change for the better, change for good. But we can interpret that as continuous process improvement, Kaizen. Okay, it builds upon the idea of the Deming cycle, in fact. So in Kaizen, people talk about Lean Six Sigma. You may have heard of this. You've heard of Lean. You've heard about Sigma. And, when we look to statistical process control, you understand about variability and so on. Well, programs of Lean Six Sigma are really ensuring high consistency, lean operations being undertaken, and the fact that in Lean Six Sigma projects, they're looking for variability to be reduced and consistency to be improved. So the idea is, with the Deming cycle, it's often called the PDCA cycle. Not a very good acronym, is it? But the idea is you move from the baseline, and through time, you run a project, you plan a project and continuous improvement, you enact it, you check the consequences, and then you take further action and evolve what's going on. So effectively, it's like a wheel moving along, hence a cycle, and the idea is the performance moves upward, that there's continuous improvement over time. Lean Six Sigma, the actual approach, I've said that's the Deming cycle, but in Lean Six Sigma, it's often called the DMAC approach. Now, it's an even worse acronym, isn't it? DMAIC. But it's the idea of defining the continuous improvement project, doing the analysis, doing the measurement, collecting the data and doing the measurement, analyzing this, improving, and then enacting this and controlling the implementation, and then redefining what's going on. So Lean Six Sigma is characterized by what's called the DMAC cycle of and stages in the project itself. There is a video that you can watch, just a guy talking at a flip chart, but it's quite useful. It's quite a useful investment of 5 or 6 minutes of your time just to look through what's Six Sigma and DMAC. And also in this, it ties up what we were doing last week on statistical process control with what you're doing this week with total quality management. So normally I show that in the lecture, but you're quite welcome to watch that in your own time using that URL address, or you might want to go into Blackboard and click on the YouTube video link there to watch it. Now, the big thing about Kaizen improvement was that this notion that quality circles seemed a good idea. The methodology of quality improvements was a great thing to deploy within an organization. But with quality circles, it was voluntary. And some people say it can't just be voluntary. It isn't just something that's nice to have. And also, we can't just rely on voluntary groups coming up with their ideas of projects that need to be projects of quality and identifying where the issues are. The argument is that actually many projects need to be management initiated. So why not have mandatory quality improvement teams, which is often what they're called, quality improvement teams or process improvement teams. Yes, you can adopt the methodology or a typical methodology of the quality circle, or you can go through the DMAC cycle of Lean Six Sigma. But actually management choose the problem. They identify where they see a problem. And also, they don't just wait for volunteers, they actually select the individuals to make up that improvement team, sometimes called a working party, of course, tackling some of these issues. Okay, so that's where we've really moved, the Kaizen improvement. Yes, it's continuous improvement, it's change for the better, but often when people are talking about Kaizen, they're talking not just about nice participative quality circle programs, but also management initiated and management mandated groups for improvement and for tackling process analysis and process improvement projects more generally. Okay, now this session was entitled TQM, and amazingly we've actually got now at the definition of TQM. And the reason why I've left it so long is that we've really got to understand the holistic, organisation-wide, participative approach to quality before we can start to understand why this term TQM came about and what it actually means. So for TQM, Kaizen is the underlying principle. It's continuous and never-ending improvement. TQM, another view of TQM or an associated view, is that it's based on the principle that everyone should participate and everyone is responsible for quality. You can't just pass off bad quality or wash your hands of it. Everybody has their part to play and everybody has responsibility for quality. It's not just management responsibility, or it's not just the fault of the employees. Everybody in an organization shares that responsibility and has individual responsibility of their own to ensure the product or the service they're passing on, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, whether it's a customer from one point to another, or whether it's information being passed on, that is actually of the highest quality for the recipient, whether that's an external customer or whether it's an internal customer, the next stage of the process. The objective of TQM is that employees should seek to improve quality, but not just through engagement in quality improvement projects through participative programs, but also understand that measurement is absolutely key and process and quality control are really important in this, but also ensuring a right first time attitude. If we can ensure quality at source, we don't spend time and money trying to rectify things at a later stage. And of course, that tends to have a knock-on effect in terms of reducing the quality perceived by any customer. So the key themes in TQM are continuous improvement, Kaizen, right first time, and customer satisfaction. So what does a TQM organization look like? Now, TQM, it's a bit like just-in-time management. You know, the term just-in-time doesn't mean that you'll ever actually get to the point where all deliveries are made just in time for when they're being used. And TQM is the same. You can never have absolute, total, perfect quality, but it's a panacea that you want to move towards. Okay, so it's this notion of don't just try and improve or cost minimize or optimize performance in different ways. Actually, the emphasis in quality improvement in TQM is to say, no matter how good you think your process, your people, your product, your service is, there's always room for some improvement. So that's a sort of different approach to many traditional organizations. So what does an organisation that's seeking, whether it is practicing TQM, look like, or what does an organisation that's moving well down the road to TQM look like? Well, this perfect organisation would have a big focus on customer requirements, but also a focus on product or service provision, a focus on process designs and the organisational work for people to deliver the customers the products and services of the right quality to the customer at the end. You also find that a TQM organisation has a commitment to improving quality and service at all levels. If you like, it's a culture or an ethos There's an emergent ethos based upon keeping the customer happy, based on being focused on quality and service and ensuring customer satisfaction throughout. And the fourth one, I mean, this links to what we were talking about last week with process control. It's not just a desire to ensure high quality and to hit peaks along the way, but actually, and I would argue more importantly, consistency, ensuring that quality and service is of a consistent level, that it doesn't vary, because we've all experienced from suppliers, from retailers, from service organizations, even from universities, we've identified peaks of high quality, but also from that same organisation, we might have also seen problems or where we felt that the delivery of the product or service is not to the right standard. Think about a restaurant, is it consistent in the way in which, in the service and the high level of quality of service it provides? So consistency is so important. In a TQM organisation, problem solving and decisions are not just made by one person at the top, but they're based upon teamwork approaches. So, as I was saying, the quality improvement team approach, very much influenced historically by quality circles and quality circle methodologies, is very much a feature of what's going on. The next point, a TQM organisation adopts a scientific approach to quality control and problem solving, i.e. they don't just put their finger in the air and guess what's going on or just make decisions on a whim. They have data, they have information, and they base their decisions on this information. So widespread use and adoption of quality and process control, for example, the sort of things that we looked at last week. TQM organisations also seek to develop partnerships with suppliers, whether those are suppliers of materials or services or subcontractors coming in, because they're well aware that if you're really serious about quality at source and right first time, that actually you can't just divorce yourself from your suppliers. You need to be working together in long-term partnerships to ensure the quality of incoming goods and services. So those of you doing supply chain management will have probably touched on many of these issues. And then finally, the thing that really characterises organisations who are genuinely moving towards TQM is that in the organisation and throughout the organisation, there's this quest for perfection in product quality and in delivery. Okay, so that's important because sometimes we talk about TQM, but let's have a look there, and those bullet points listed up there tell you, okay, idealistically, this is what a TQM organisation should look like. It shouldn't be an organisation that claims to have TQM and has implemented it, but then the evidence shows that they don't deliver high quality product or service. The points there indicate the organisational features of for TQM. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the critical issues, and Mihaela Kellerman's book is particularly useful when we look at this. So some of the caveats. So the first one is that what comprises TQM is different between the different organizations because they use different programs and different emphases in what they're doing. So when people talk about success rates for TQM, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because pretty much every organization has chosen either a slightly different approach to others or a wildly different approach and emphasis to others. They will have chosen different programs, and they could have used voluntary programs of participation or more mandatory top-down programs. They could have their emphasis in other areas. So that's one of the criticisms, that actually when we use the term TQM, it's a sort of broad term. Second thing is that many organisations talk about, in their publicity, about their adoption of total quality approaches and customer care, customer satisfaction, and claim to have changed their organisation culture. But you've got to be a bit careful with that, because you can't just run a programme for a year and then claim to change the culture of an organisation. Those of you who will be studying comparative business cultures with me next year at Keele will know that I really argue the point that culture runs really deep within organizations. It runs as deep as underlying assumptions, beliefs, and values of people. And you might change some attitudes, you might change some practice in the short term, but organizations tend to revert back to that core underlying culture given half the chance. And there is this danger that supporters of TQM tend to use this term culture too loosely. You know, they don't actually fully understand what's meant by the term corporate culture. Okay, so be a little bit careful when you read these claims that hero manager has come in, turned a company around and vastly changed the culture, because you know you need to be monitoring over 5, 10, 20 years whether that's actually been the case. Organizations like Apple, Samsung, um, and many other people that you can think of, they develop their culture over many, many years. So their quality systems and their customer satisfaction are as a result of long-standing underlying beliefs and values of people within their organization. They haven't just been changed overnight. Third critical issue, and I can say this because I have been involved in coordination of TQM programs, but there is a danger that TQM coordinators or facilitators can appear a little patronizing to others in the organization. I remember when I was a young quality circle coordinator in the business I worked, that I proudly went out and announced to a group of very experienced workers that I recognise that they, the operators, are the real experts in their work. They see things go wrong in a day-to-day business, and they should be the ones to suggest improvements. You can imagine what their response was. Oh yeah, you know, we've worked here for 40, 50 years. I think we do realize that, you know, don't patronize us. And, you know, it's probably because nobody's actually listened to what we've had to say in the past. So it might be the case that they're the experts and so on, but you've got to be a little bit careful in sort of diving in and claiming to be almost like a new messiah coming in with this message of TQM, engagement, involvement, and so on, where many people are actually quite skeptical or have been very frustrated in the past and very wary of new change programs. And the fourth issue, this picks up on what we've said before. TQM actually is an umbrella term. Actually, there are many different routes to total quality management. It involves the introduction of a whole range and can involve the introduction of different types of quality improvement programs. So, you know, a real critical issue, perhaps, you know, when we're looking at it from a Marxist perspective, and there's a whole body of literature looking critically at total quality management, some papers I've written myself in the past as well, is that actually many organizations have introduced things like quality, and they've used quality as a bit of a stick to hit people with. They're claiming they're increasing customer focus, increasing democracy within the workplace and so on, but actually what they're seeking to do is it's like a subtle new way to increase their power over workers, over trade unions and so on. Many trade unions are very resistant to these quality circles or improvement groups or voice of the employee groups, as they're often called in organisations, because they see it as circumventing the normal channels and actually being used to the advantage of management and to the detriment of some of the workers. There is a danger as well in many organisations. I've had it myself where I've joined organisations and I've questioned elements or large elements of their approach to quality, and people sometimes look aghast and say, wait a minute, you're arguing against quality? But actually, you can be sceptical about the approaches being made. I don't think anybody would sit here today and say, actually, I'm anti-quality. I don't believe in good customer service. I'd rather do a bad job than a good job. Nobody's going to be saying that. And you know, sometimes people say, well, you can't argue against quality in the approaches. But having said that, you can argue that the approach being taken and the systems that are in place and the existence of process controls, or more likely the non-existence of controls, is something that needs to be questioned. Okay, so I always like to have healthy skepticism, if you like, a very reflective view and a critical view, of how any organisation I work is seeking to improve quality. It's not because I'm anti-quality, but it's because and it's not because I want to argue against quality and service, but it's just that you can question whether what we're doing is really the right approach and whether it's going to end up with quality assurance, assuring quality to our customers, to patients, to clients, to patients in hospitals and so on. Okay, so we're at the summary stage now. We've looked at total quality management. As I said, this really fits into the quality by design element. Last week we looked at quality by conformance with process and quality control, and then we've looked at the TQM approach, or TQM, the group of approaches under this umbrella term of TQM. And I hope that by taking you through the different programs and almost a chronology of how all this has evolved in the late 20th century and into the 21st century, it's given you an insight into what TQM really means. And we haven't just sat there and prescribed approaches. We were aware that there are criticisms of the approach, and like any other subject you're looking at, we need to take a contingency-based approach that actually it's horses for courses. What might be a really successful quality program in one organization is not the appropriate one for another organization. Okay, again, this is such an important topic that there's some chapters in all the texts that relate to this week's topic. Dale, there are 3 chapters there. Mihaela Kaliman's chapter 8 really replicates quite a lot of what we've had in this lecture. The Bamford and Forrester chapter 10 is about quality improvement, and then the same thing, Slack and Brandon Jones, the big operations and process management textbook, has some good solid material on quality improvement and TQM within it. Okay, now with the readings, I'm not saying you have to read all of these things, but the reading is there if you want to do it, or if you've got one of those books that you've got a personal preference for, then it's well worth picking up that chapter and reading through, or that chapter or those chapters, and reading this through in association with this week's lecture. So this week's tutorials, following this lecture, the tutorials, you'll be looking at a case study. The case study is provided as a PDF file on the Keele learning environment, and it comes from the Slack and Brandon Jones textbook that we've just been talking about. It's only 3 pages long, and it looks at a conference center and conference hotel in Australia. Okay, and what it is, it's asking you to look at what factors you use to judge the operations performance of this conference centre called Ferndale Sands. What improvement priority would you give to each of the performance measures, and which two suggestions put forward by 2 of the people in the case, Robin and Nick, would you recommend? Which one do you think is the best solution? Now, what you will probably be doing during this lecture will be introduced to an analysis tool called the improvement performance matrix. This is actually, there's some writing about this in Slack and Brandon Jones, but I anticipate the tutor will be taking you through this, and by using the importance performance grid, which really looks at each of the issues and thinks, how important is this, almost like Pareto, yeah, how important is it, and is our performance good or poor? And just to give you an insight, if one of the issues that they're looking at is really important and their performance is really poor, there's a gap there, isn't there? And so this matrix helps you identify those areas you want to take action on. And conversely, there might be some areas you perform exceptionally well, which the customer doesn't think is important at all. So you're actually adding cost and not really adding any value, although you might be very proud of your performance and in relation to a particular sphere of your business. Okay, so the case study is really trying to look at that and trying to think about a service environment and how you might sort of use some of the tools and techniques that you've been looking at and how you can relate the case to what we've learned this week in total quality management. Okay, I'll leave it there, but I hope that this lecture has been useful for you.